Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always my co-host Nick Velato. Tonight we're here to recap the Giants Hard Knock episode 4. The fourth episode. This one focused on the draft, but did not take us fully through the draft. It just focused on the draft. And it started things off with an opening scene with Daniel Jones, looking very strong in movement skills, a lot of stop and start, which is really impressive coming off the ACL. This was all the way back in April, Nick. So we're hoping, 4 more months removed from that. He's even better shape, ready to go for training camp. And it started with Joe Schoen kind of expressing almost like a narrative or almost like a voiceover, I should say, that look, Daniel, we do believe in you, but look, you've had these injuries. You've had all these injuries. And he did make mention, by the way, he said, the reality is you've had all the injuries. He also said, Joe Schoen, you didn't play the way you would have hoped to the first 6 games. I love that he mentioned that because there's a lot of Giants fans who don't really look at the tape or just have a different memory of the first 6 games. They thought every single snap was a jailbreak blitz where just immediately it was pressure. But what Joe Schoen and some of these coaches are doing, they're looking for every play, not just the ones with pressure. And there were plays where the Giants quarterbacks last year, Jones included, were not pressured and maybe they bailed from the pocket too early. And I think that goes into what Joe Schoen is saying when he's like, you didn't play the way you would have hoped to the first 6 games. I think it's genuine. And I think it's not genuine to say, let's completely throw out the first 6 games. And I think that's important. That's something the Giants are considering. And that's why they kind of went into this episode, Nick, talking a lot about the idea of the quarterback and potentially trading up for the quarterback. Ultimately, they didn't really have an option to, as we'll learn in the episode. But I thought it was interesting where they started this episode with Jones in his rehab and Joe Schoen kind of talking to him like, look, we still believe in you, but this and this and this.
First, I want to say if my internet sucks, I apologize. I am currently using my iPhone's hotspot to record this over the internet, so we have to see how it goes. And to your point, I'm glad that they mentioned that as well. But the Giants, we know we're not under any delusions here that the Giants are fully aware and understand who Daniel Jones is, Daniel Jones's capabilities. They have him under contract. They can see if he can progress. Hopefully he will. But we also understand that Schoen, he had his ducks in a row here. And he had an opportunity, as his son so eloquently put, hey, you're in striking distance. Why don't you just go and make the move? You might not have a chance to do this again. His son said that while his son and his family were in the general manager room with him. But there was no one to tango with. There was not 2 to tango, right? That's what it takes. Patriots were selecting a quarterback. But it did seem like, according to this episode, that the Giants, if they had an opportunity, I think they would have traded up for Drake May. Yeah. But I think Jane Daniels is in on that. And it wasn't just that comment that we heard in the trailer last week from Brian Dable saying, oh yeah, because it was also Dennis Hickey who was like, yeah, sure. And it did just give off the vibe that if Jane Daniels had fallen in the draft or if Washington went in another direction, maybe the Giants would have picked up the phone and tried to pull the trigger with another team, even though it didn't seem like the Arizona Cardinals were too eager to trade out of 4 because they were so dialed in on Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, and that was what we learned in this episode. I don't think the Giants, they were very careful, I thought, about what they reveled. They didn't go into much of the scattering reports on Jaden Daniels or Drake May. They showed a little bit of board work between the 2 of them, but just mostly like voiceover type stuff around it. And they showed the one clip of Brian Dable saying, yes, I would trade up for Jaden Daniels. And they showed the one clip of Mike Kafka being asked about Drake May and saying, yes, if you have a conviction, you got to go up and get your guy, which led me to believe Kafka was a Drake May guy. But they didn't go too much further into that. And I don't blame them because ultimately there's no trade to be made. The Patriots weren't moving it unless Joe Schoen offered them a king's ransom, 1, 2, and 3, and 1, 2. And he said, look, I'm exaggerating, but probably wasn't that far off from what they would have wanted. They would have wanted 1, 2, 1, 2 for the next 2 years, I think. Ultimately, maybe they give up on the 3, the Patriots, and allow that to be a 7 or a 5 or something like that. But it's still a lot of capital to go up and get this player. And he even said kind of like, yeah, like we'll consider it. But look, we need the quarterback. He's like, I would, if we had a quarterback, I'd be down to trade with you, dude. But we need the quarterback. And they clearly had a high grade. And it's clear that the Giants didn't have as high a grade on the 4th, 5th, 6th quarterbacks in this class as they did on this big 3. That is beyond clear from this episode, right? We learned that for sure in this episode, despite not learning much about their thoughts about Jaden Daniels or Drake May. I thought they didn't give away almost anything there. A little bit on Daniels, like I said, with just Dable being like, yeah, we like this kid. But even I thought at the pro day, Nick, they might talk a little bit about Daniels and Neighbors. But no, it was just focus on Neighbors from the skill set standpoint. So obviously with Daniels, it kind of just and May, it was kind of just not much, just a little bit there. So that didn't surprise me though.
I also found it funny how Brian Dable, in front of a bunch of guys, pulls out his phone and they just start looking at all the successful quarterbacks that were selected over the last 3 draft classes and then the last 10 years and who was still on the team and who were the ones that were hits. And then Brian Dable, he said when referencing the low hit rates, they went through them, all of them. And I think the only ones that were still on the teams that drafted them were Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Daniel Jones, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Tua, Jordan Love, Herbert, Lawrence, and then Young and Stroud. So Brian Dable, when he was referencing how low that hit rate is, which is something that you've mentioned several times on this podcast as well. He's like, yeah, we'll take the CJ Stroud route if we go quarterback.
Right.
Obviously, ultimately they didn't go quarterback. And then someone, might have been Joe Schoen, shouted, how about the Josh Allen one? Just to keep it within.
Brian Dable's like, get it. What's your takeaway on this? He's like, get it right. Take the Stroud. That's, you want them to have that conviction. Obviously, they didn't have that opportunity this year to get it right, in their minds at least, with regards to J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, and any of the quarterbacks selected after those 3. They didn't feel that was right. They didn't feel that was their guy. But, Dable did say earlier in the episode when they brought Jaden Daniels in, and he's like, I want to make sure you want to be here. And he said, I want to be here. It's like, Jaden, my guy, like, I got the feeling that Dable was higher on Jaden Daniels. I also got that conversation with Joe Schoen's kid was also interesting because we heard all draft season the Giants were highest on May after Caleb Williams. Though the Caleb thing wasn't confirmed, it's just something that I've heard from a source, and I'm very confident in that Caleb was their clear 1-1. But we've heard that it was May over Jaden. I don't know, like the conversation with Joe Schoen's kid. So Joe Schoen's son was like, he's like, what would you do? And Joe Schoen's son didn't mince words, right? He's not, I think it's very clear, my read at least, that Joe Schoen's son is not a Daniel Jones guy. Let's be honest about the situation. Joe Schoen was like, trade up for Jaden Daniels. You only get a chance to do this once. No one would ever say that if they were a Daniel Jones guy. They would be like, we have our quarterback. Why would we ever need a trade up? Let's get a receiver. So he's like, trade up for Jaden Daniels. You only have a chance to get this job once. Like, make the move, get your guy. And then after that, he's like, all right, well, Joe Schoen's like, look, we're not going to get Jaden Daniels. I think at that point, Joe Schoen knew Washington. It was like 4 hours before the draft. He's like, knew Washington was going to take Jaden. So he's like, what else? And he's like, Drake May or a wide receiver. But like, clearly, I think the point I'm trying to make here, Nick, is that the Giants were higher on Jaden Daniels than any of us, I think, realized during the pre-draft process.
Yeah, it could be the case for sure. I mean, it's hard to really discern, but we know they needed a quarterback. We know that they were in the market to trade up for a quarterback. Jaden Daniels went 2nd overall. I'd imagine that it was one of the 3 quarterbacks who went 1, 2, and 3. The Giants would have pulled the trigger on if they had the opportunity, but they did not. But I think what's even more fascinating about this episode wasn't necessarily the discussion about the quarterback position, but it was the possible trade down scenario if Malik Neighbors was selected by the Los Angeles Chargers, which, I mean, Harbaugh thought he would go Joe Alt, thought he would go to offensive lineman. It's more aligned with his identity. But as they said in this episode, Malik Neighbors was within 3 players that Harbaugh and the Chargers were considering. And let's just say after losing Big Mike and losing Keenan Allen, what if that precipitated Malik Neighbors going to number 5 and then a trade down with the Chicago Bears to number 9? And then the Giants were sitting there. And the 2 names that came up was, if Rome Odunze is not there, Brock Bowers was the other name that Joe Schoen and the Giants mentioned. There was a realistic scenario where the Giants came away with a tight end in the top 10 in this draft class. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts were, look, I was high on Bowers, and I believe you were too. I always felt like if it wasn't going to be Neighbors or trading up for a quarterback, I wanted Rome or Bowers. So this is basically in line with how I felt. But it's interesting to hear the Giants' interest in Bowers because we didn't get much of that in the pre-draft process at all. We also got confirmation, like you just mentioned, that they were high on Rome Odunze. And Joe Schoen mentioned he'd be okay with Rome Odunze, but he wanted Neighbors. But we also got confirmation that the dumbest rumor, and I guess it was a report from a couple sources, one being Adam Schefter, who, by the way, don't think that this makes people seem to be forgetting that, like, yeah, Adam Schefter and all these guys can have bad reports too. You know why? Don't you remember that draft season is wrought with misinformation? Teams are purposely putting out wrong information. So any source at any time could be getting info from a source that's real. The source is like, look, I'm hearing this, but that was planted info. It was planted by the Giants. So even Adam Schefter, that can happen to, because Adam Schefter mentioned the Joe Alt stuff with the Giants. And we heard some other people take it a step further, because I think Schefter just said if he falls to 6, the Giants would love to get Joe Alt. But I think other people are like, no, they're trying to trade up for Joe Alt, which is logically never made sense. But this was confirmation. None of that was true. That couldn't have been further off, because Joe Schoen said it best. I mean, he went detail about how unlikely that is, how wrong that report was. Because he's like, look, We want Neighbors. If we don't get Neighbors, we get Rome. If we don't get Rome and we'd be okay with Rome at 6, we might be better off just trying to trade a 9 because then we could still possibly get Rome, who would be okay with, or we can get Bowers, like you mentioned. But he's like, I'm just hoping. What happens is, he said it point blank, I'm hoping the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh take the tackle, take Joe Alt at 5. He literally was hoping for it. No one who was obsessed with Joe Alt to the point of trading up to him or even hoping he falls to 5 or 6 would be discussing that they're hoping another team trades him. Clearly, the Giants did not want Joe Alt. Clearly, the Giants have a franchise left tackle, Andrew Thomas, under contract and young on their roster. Clearly, they invested the 7th overall pick in Evan Neal. But regardless, you wouldn't take another left tackle. None of it made sense, but I'm just glad this at least got confirmed, Nick, because that was giving me a ton of agita, and it was really painful to read online. I'll be honest.
Were there like a lot of Giant fans with that opinion? Like, I know there were some,
enough.
but that was
people are questioning me. They're sending me the report from Giant Insider. Giant Insider said on his podcast they were trying to trade up for Joe Alt. Oh, here's the report from Insider. Like, I'm supposed to care about that crap. Like, guys, there's misinformation in draft season. The Giants are purposely leaking false info to not get the real info. Let the real info be the only thing they leak. This is common sense. This is draft 101. Yeah, we got to understand this stuff.
It seems pretty obvious that the Giants were trying to trade up for a quarterback. And to suggest that they're trying to trade up for an offensive lineman seems wildly miscalculated. With this cleared up, it certainly throws that narrative out of the window. Although I don't think a lot of Giant fans thought that. But
no,
again,
man, it was a small minority, but they're vocal and they're coming in the mentions. Like, but look at this. How do you respond to this? Yeah. I don't need to respond to this. It's so stupid that why are you asking me about them trading up for Joe Alt? Instead of you asking us to respond to it, why don't you take a step back and think logically how this could ever be possible? I'm sorry. I had to rant on this. It was too frustrating for me, Nick.
Rant away. So, Dan, I wanted to ask you this about Mike Groh. So Mike Groh got to interview Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze all at once, and they all did fantastically. Mike Groh said it was the best interview he ever had with wide receivers. And then at the end, when none of those receivers were in the room, someone, I can't remember who, but someone asked Mike Groh, if you had your selection of one of those 3 receivers, who would it be? And he said Malik Neighbors. How cool is that? Or do you think he recorded 3 separate scenarios where he said each of those receivers' names just for Hard Knocks?
No, I think it's genuine. I think Mike Groh's number 1 wide receiver in this class was Malik Neighbors. That's Giants wide receiver coach Mike Groh. And John Mara was in the room, and he was like, oh, wow, really? Over Marv? He's like, yeah. Over
pretty
Marv?
Good, man.
Yeah. Nah, it's not like yours. But, like, that's what John said, and John's got to be in on everything. He's talking about we'll talk about the quarterback stuff with John in a little bit, John Mara. But, Mike Groh got his guy. I think that was literally his number 1 wide receiver on the board. And he wasn't alone. Brian Dable loved him. Brian Dable made mention of having a conversation with Nick Saban. And Nick Saban said there were 2 guys in the SEC that were problems for us. It was Malik Neighbors and Brock Bowers. And we even heard throughout the episode how important the Giants view playing in the SEC. Ernie Accorsi talked about it with Eli Manning and why that stood out. John Mara confirmed, part of it was playing in the SEC. Brandon Brown's like, yep, that does matter. And clearly Brian Dable and Joe Schoen, it mattered to them because Malik Neighbors, to me, sounded from this episode like they're clear-cut number 1 option after maybe Marv. Now, I don't know if Mike Groh would have gotten his way if Marv was on the board. That I'm not sure of because it seemed like Joe Schoen was into Marv. Sure, Brian Dable was. That would have been interesting to see if it was between Marv. Like if somehow J.J. McCarthy went 4, Nick, and then Joe Alt went 5. What would the Giants have done, Marv or Neighbors? I'm curious if Mike Groh would have got his way that way, but it was definitely interesting to see. And by the way, in that interview, Nick, I love that, we had 2 episodes ago, the Giants asked Jaden Daniels to recite a play call in his interview, and he kind of got it wrong, if we're going to be honest. Twice he had 2 chances. They put Mike Groh put Malik Neighbors on the spot with what sounded like a pretty tough question to me, at least from next to standpoint. And Neighbors snap answered it, and it was right. So I just thought that was really interesting. I don't think he gets a lot of credit for his football IQ, Malik Neighbors, though. If you watch the tape, you can clearly see that he's a very nuanced football player that actually does have a high football IQ.
Even watching him run routes at his pro day, you could see some of the ways at the top of his breaks that he is maneuvering his body that would throw off a defensive back. There are those little nuances that maybe didn't always come up on film because he was running open very frequently, creating separation, and the offense also assisted in that. But I think he is going to be just a dynamite player for the New York Giants. Like, I'm really excited about Malik Neighbors.
I'm with you on that. I think he's going to be much better for the people say, oh, what's the difference between the Giants offense now and then? They had Saquon Barkley. They lost Saquon Barkley. They got Malik Neighbors. I think you'll see. I think Malik Neighbors is going to put together a lot more explosive plays this season than Saquon Barkley did last season. And that's 40-plus yard plays. I don't think he's as reliant as Barkley was on the players around him. Barkley was relying on the offensive line. Barkley was relying on the quarterback actually commanding respect from an opposing defense and dropping safeties and playing corners off the line of scrimmage and linebackers off the line of scrimmage. Malik Neighbors doesn't need any of that, really. Just get him the ball in space, hit him in stride, and he will do the rest. And that's just one way he wins. He wins as a route runner. He wins on the vertical plane. He wins at all three levels. That's not something you can really say about Saquon Barkley, in my opinion. You needed some semblance of good blocking for Saquon Barkley to work, or some semblance of good play design, one of the two. I'm not sold you need either for Malik Neighbors. I think he's that talented. I think at times that showed, by the way, on tape. I don't think Jaden Daniels was perfect at all with some of the plays that Malik Neighbors made.
I love a great deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to enter a parallel universe or go through some elaborate labyrinth just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called them on it. Turns out, it really is that easy to get wireless for $15 a month. It's easy to switch to. The website has a good interface. I have a couple buddies who have recommended this to me. They speak highly of Mint Mobile. Get started. Go to mintmobile.com/BBB. That is 3 Bs. There you'll see that right now, all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. Plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/BBB. That's mintmobile.com/BBB. 3 Bs. Triple B. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/BBB. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. You ever feel sluggish or out of focus? Are you stressed? Has your digestive system caused discomfort or flatulence like a certain co-host on this podcast during a live stream? If so, you should check out AG1. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my daily health. I had more energy, I was better off at the gym, and I could focus on my work in a much more efficient manner. That's because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. Not only did I replace my multivitamin with AG1, but I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. I recommend AG1 to all my family and friends because AG1 has a team of doctors and scientists that formulate around the latest science and maintains high quality standards within the industry. Even my friends have started drinking AG1, and they always tell me how energetic they feel and how it's helped them out at the gym, and also it's helped them manage their stress levels. That's why we're happy to have AG1 as our partner. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. Go to drinkag1.com/banter. That's drinkag1.com/banter to check it out. Our mental and physical well-being is of the utmost importance. Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all need to take that very seriously. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New York, New Jersey, Arizona, if you will, or hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE system technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/banter to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/banter. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. And before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, include EE system. As Joe Schoen said, though, they just need to find a way to, and Brian Dable, for him to channel that dog in him, channel that temperament that he has. It's not going to be a great look if the Giants are struggling week 3.
No.
And Malik Neighbors' stats aren't good, and he's like throwing a tantrum, and Daniel Jones is it's not going to be a great look. I'm hoping that doesn't happen. But you know what does cure all this? Something that has eluded the New York Giants for quite a while now, Dan, and that is freaking winning. Winning will solve that.
Yeah, and don't quote me on this because I don't remember my college football that well, but I don't know if Malik Neighbors got good quarterback play until this last season with Jaden Daniels. I feel like he had pretty average maybe quarterback play before this with his LSU career. So, on that note, maybe he's proven already that he can deal with this type of, we'll call it adversity, which, would be, let's be honest, the Giants have struggled to move the ball through the air. I think Daniel Jones, I saw the stat the other day, Nick, he's averaged 208 yards passing in his career. That's not a number that will obviously, if it continues, lead to Malik Neighbors getting the volume he wants. He doesn't want just 200 yards of a passing game and he gets his piece of that pie, whatever that may be. He's going to want a 250 to 300 yard per game type passing offense. And so that will get him his due. But I think he's dealt with worse at LSU or equal. So I think there is at least some evidence that he can play through that level of adversity. We'll see, though. You're right.
So let's move on to Theo Johnson. He made a little bit of an appearance in this episode at the beginning of the episode at Penn State Pro Day. We saw Carmen Bricillo talking, Giants offensive line coach Carmen Bricillo talking with Saquon Barkley about some of the additions along the offensive line. Carmen Bricillo said something to the effect of Jermaine Illuminor. He's like my son. I've been playing, or he's been playing for me for a while. Like he loves him. Runyon's an athletic, smart player who's going to come in, and Saquon's like, well, okay, that's cool. And then we saw Theo Johnson running, and there were a couple New York Giant front office guys being like, oh, he's so tall and he's so fast. Oh, he's so explosive. It was a little bit weird the way they were saying it. And then they were like, he'll be the second tight end off the board. He's checking every box along the way. I was like, yo, they're really into Theo Johnson. And they're able to get him with a day 3 pick. That's exciting. And it excited them for sure.
It is. And, for all those people during draft season who were like, the Giants didn't do it. They didn't take BPA in the 4th round with Theo Johnson. They just took the need. They just kept drafting for need. Clearly, that's not the case. He was obviously their best player available on the board that deep into a draft on day 3 if he was their tight end 2 in this class. So yes, it did fill a need ultimately, but it was also clearly their best player available.
And think about it this way too. If he was their tight end 2, which we're not 100% certain of that, someone just said on the Giants, like he's the tight end 2. So we're not 100% sure of that. But they were debating on scenarios where they would take the tight end 1, Brock Bowers, in the top 10. That did not happen. They get the star receiver, and then they end up getting their tight end 2 in round 4 on day 3. That's a win.
Yeah, if they get their evals right. Correct. We'll see if they do, but I feel good about these 2 prospects. I really do. Obviously, Neighbors goes without saying, but I do feel good about Theo. But a couple notes also, I thought it was interesting that Bricillo, just a quick takeaway, mentioned Runyon could give them some center flex. I thought that was very interesting. Maybe that is more of along lines of we doubt that's going to happen. Runyon is likely to be locked into guard, but it does kind of give me the feeling that Bricillo and the Giants, after they met and talked about last season, didn't feel great about what they had behind John Michael Schmitz at center. So I know that they kind of probably felt like that's one area they need to at least give themselves more of an opportunity to get some depth at this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's you just want versatility. That's going to be an absolute disaster if John Runyon's forced to play center. Who's going to play guard? What happened to John Michael Schmitz? I mean, it's like worst case scenario at that point, but it's good to just have competent, smart football players who can handle responsibilities that typically are not theirs.
You're damn right. And Another interesting note, they finally had a little bit of Mike Kafka, Giants offense coordinator, in this episode. I mentioned earlier what he said about Drake May going up and get your guy you have a conviction on, but he also confirmed that he really likes the Giants' 3 receivers they had. They said, Shane mentioned the 3 at receiver. I don't know who he was referring to. I assume it's Wandale Hyatt and Slayton, though it could be obviously Wandale Hyatt and Hodgins or something like that. I'm just going to go along the lines of it's Wandale Hyatt and Slayton. And I get the feeling that Mike Kafka does not feel like the wide receiver position has at all held back the Giants. Something that I completely agree with him on. Do I think that they had stars before they drafted Neighbors? No. Do I think you need star receivers to work in the NFL? No. I think a passing game is mostly down to the quarterback and the offensive line play. And a great quarterback with a solid offensive line can do a lot with very little at wide receiver. And it's mostly a timing-based, rhythm-based thing passing in the NFL. But clearly, Mike Kafka agrees because he felt good, but it's not to say that he didn't want extra talent. Nobody's ever going to deny getting extra talent, but I did think it's interesting to hear, at least according to this episode, Kafka, who's the OC, is pretty damn high on Wandale and Hyatt, 2 players that we're also very high on.
I would hope so. I mean, you spent pretty high draft capital on them. You were both. Kafka was there for both of that. I mean, a 2nd and 3rd round pick. I think we have yet to see the best from either. Obviously, they're both still young players. I think Wandale's only going to ascend, and I think Jalen Hyatt should be a difference maker now at this point, especially with Malik Neighbors. If the Giants can block and Daniel Jones can deliver the football, this wide receiver core could be, I'm not going to say special because there are a lot of wide receiver cores around the league, but special relative to what the Giants have had over the last 10 years for sure.
I completely agree with that. And, we'll never know until the offense gets a little bit more on track from a passing standpoint, but the stats do not tell the story when it comes to Jalen Hyatt and Wandale Robinson. I want to get a little into the John Mara stuff, Nick. He mentioned, I'm very nervous about giving away too much for a quarterback. He says, but then followed that by saying it's very reminiscent of 20 years ago when Accorsi made his play. So that kind of confused me because it's like, well, you were nervous about it then, you're nervous about it now, but 20 years ago, it really worked. So maybe it's just like the normal nerves you would have. But he also did say, and we heard this reported before the draft, Nick, he said, if you guys have a quarterback conviction, I support it. And that was pretty clear to me, at least, that John Mara is not going to get in the way of the Giants doing what they want to do or Joe Schoen doing what he wants to do from a management standpoint. And, he talked about how this was 20 years ago with Eli Manning. And he said, and Joe Schoen made it clear, Nick, that, he wants to take a shot in this scenario because he doesn't know if they'll be picking this high again. But I did think that something Accorsi mentioned in that little clip, Ernie Accorsi, the former Giants GM who traded up for Eli Manning, was interesting because he said, one of the things that, and Mara confirmed this, that drew them to Eli Manning and Accorsi to Eli Manning and his conviction to give up all that capital, go get him instead of just taking Ben Roethlisberger, who reportedly Tom Coughlin wanted at the time, was that, 1, he played in the SEC, but 2, he did a lot and made a ton of plays without a lot of supporting cast around him. I wonder if that played a role in the Gettleman-Mara decision to draft Daniel Jones at 6. Didn't play with a lot of talent around him at Duke. Now, quite clearly, Nick, if you look at the stats, Daniel Jones did not make a lot of plays individually that Eli made. Jones was never above 60% completion rate at Duke. Not one season. He was, I think, 117th in average depth of target, just a lot of underneath quick stuff. It wasn't like anything like watching Eli Manning at Ole Miss, but they do have that thing in common where neither Daniel Jones or Eli had any supporting talent at all at college. So did you think that played a role at all?
Maybe a little bit. I think so. It was more so probably getting to know Daniel Jones. But Dave Gettleman, he was there when Eli Manning was drafted by the New York Giants. They will draw back on their previous experiences and relate them to what's going on in the present. And I think John Mara was doing that all throughout this episode as he kept hearkening back to 20 years ago with Ernie Accorsi. And although that worked out, it gave him heart palpitations. And I do like the fact that you brought up a little bit ago and that John Mara mentioned, like, hey, I'm not going to get in the way. That was deliberately added to by HBO. But at the same time, like, I think you really need a good sales pitch to get John Mara on board. I think Joe Schoen, like, even before he called Elliot Wolf, he said something to the effect of, I gotta call John first, or I'm about to talk to John about it. So I think you really need a very good sales pitch to get him on board, but he's not going to necessarily, I think, override your decision-making process. But dude, if you do something and he's not fully on board and it doesn't work out, or if it looks bad in the first year, he might pull the plug on it. There's more than just, hey, you're good or you're not good with this decision-making process. Does that make sense?
I think that makes a ton of sense. I think we've seen it by him pulling the plug on head coaches twice recently within 2 years, or three times actually, McAdoo, Shermer, and Joe Judge.
Judgy.
So I think it's very clear. I thought you made a great point though earlier, Nick, that I want to unpack a little bit more, which is I think it's clear not only from this episode, you said it, and from past episodes, but also past actions, that the Giants are an organization with John Mara as their owner that will draw back on things that have worked in the past. Is that a good thing? That's what I'm wondering. In your mind, is that a good thing? Because I think quarterbacks come in all different shapes and sizes. I think winning comes in all different shapes and sizes. I don't necessarily think the past is a harbinger for the future in any way whatsoever in life, but also in building football winning teams. But I think it is in the case of the Giants. I really do believe what you said is true, Nick, that they are looking back on things that have worked in the past to try to do things differently. Or even just Mara mentioning, oh, I'm getting reminders to the past 20 years ago and just drawing back on things that happened instead of just looking forward to what is to come. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think you're right. I think the hiring of Dave Gettleman was in part a step towards what you were just said, right? Like you want to bring back somebody who knows the organization to try and rekindle Eli Manning's career now that it is in the latter years. You bring him in, and that's one reason why we were so excited when the Giants went out and they hired Joe Schoen. It was somebody outside of the building, with someone who would bring a fresh perspective to the New York Giants. It's something I believe they so desperately need because they're a very conservative-oriented organization. And they're going to look back in the past, be like, well, this is the way that we won back in the year 2000. Let's do that again. And that doesn't always translate when you have such a different game right now with RPOs and hybrid defenses and everything that's going on. So I think the Giants coaching staff and the Giants staff in general, they're not afflicted by that mindset. But when it comes from the top down, it can affect the decision-making process. Maybe I just value or believe that the front office and the guys that Joe Schoen has surrounded this team with, they're not going to be bogged down by that mindset, but you still have to get things past John Mara. So I guess it would afflict them to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, look, Nick, I'll be honest with you and the listeners. I am in some way concerned about this because I don't necessarily know if they're learning from past mistakes, and I don't necessarily know if they've made changes. It seemed on paper like they made this drastic organizational change by bringing in Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, and I do think John Mara is giving him a ton of leash to do what he wants to do here. But at the same time, I think it's clear that they are an organization that uses the past to try to predict the future in some ways still. I don't know if that's just gone with the Dave Gettleman firing as much as we would have hoped and would like to see it gone. Now, it's not always going to be a bad thing. Like you said, sometimes you'll hit that way, but it just didn't get a good feel with John Mara keep referencing this Eli thing, especially when it's just like the situation is so different then and now. And even Joe Schoen made that clear to him, right? Joe Schoen was like, because John Mara's like, well, listen, he's like, listen, Joe, when we did it 20 years ago, the main thing was, of course, he sold us that, he won the SEC, did this. We had to get him. So if you have a conviction on him, like I told you, I'm not going to get away with your conviction. Joe Schoen's like, look, it's not Joe Schoen didn't say this in his words, Nick, but he's basically like, it's not a conviction, dude. I don't think we're going to be drafting anywhere near this high. And I really like one of these three quarterbacks. We have a shot at one of the top three quarterbacks, and we have a clear tier of these top three quarterbacks. I want to get one of those top three quarterbacks. So for Schoen, it was more of just like, look, the math of the situation. We value quarterback as a position. We believe in Daniel to an extent, but we know we can upgrade it and we could really win in the NFL with a really great quarterback. When are we going to get a chance to draft a top three quarterback again? That's how I read Schoen from his reaction to Mara. Mara, though, to me was, you better have a conviction on this guy or I don't want to do this thing. It was more of that. That's how I felt.
I agree, but I also think we're reading into this because it's only a couple, comments.
We only get like a second. Yeah.
We only get a little bit to work off of here. But it is funny as now I give opinions on something that I just detracted from, right? It worked out, John. Like what happened with Eli Manning worked out.
I know. Why is he so nervous about it? It worked, dude. I didn't get that too.
Yeah, I don't know. So we got 2 Super Bowls out of Eli Manning. It was one of the, I would say him and Lawrence Taylor are like the 2 faces of the franchise, right? Regarding just being like Hall of Fame, elite type of players. There's been plenty of others, but Eli Manning is the face of the modern day New York Giants organization. We could only hope that a trade up for a guy like Drake May or Jane Daniels could have provided us half of that type of beautiful lifestyle that we just absolutely miss at this point.
It does. It was a long time ago. It really was. But got to hope that Jones can take that step forward. They got him the receiver, the best talent he's ever had at receiver. Clearly, Mike Kafka and the staff likes the talent, the surrounding receivers, 2, 3, 4 now. He's got a lot of talent to work with if the O-line can hold up. And he's got to get the freaking ball out there on time, lead the receiver, and put it into a spot where he can catch the ball and do something with it. Because, look, Joe Schoen was clear in my mind about what happened at the end of this episode. He said, if Malik Neighbors is on the board or Marvin Harrison, we're taking him. Otherwise, we might trade back. But he said, I'm happy with Neighbors or Odunze. If we trade back, it's Odunze or Brock Bowers. They wanted skill player, and they felt like these skill players were clearly the best option for them if they didn't get a quarterback. And so they went out and got their second best option here, maybe best, depending on who you ask, quarterback versus receiver. But they got a top option, a receiver. They got the receiver they wanted. Their wide receiver coach wanted him more than Marv Harrison Jr., for God's sake. So it really feels like, I like what I think it was Brandon Brown, Nick, said this at the beginning of the episode, or at one point in the episode. He's like, when you're drafting this high, it's really important that you maximize the value of this pick. And I feel like that played a big role in deciding to go Neighbors. And I think Neighbors really will give them a chance to maximize the value of the 6th pick. And in a lot of ways, take this franchise forward. Now, it may not happen right away if the quarterback play doesn't improve, if the O-line play doesn't improve. But eventually, Malik Neighbors, I think, will take this franchise forward.
Malik Neighbors is going to be one of the best wide receivers the Giants have had since Odell Beckham Jr. We've said it so many times at this point. So let's see it happen now on the field. And hopefully that opens up more opportunities for the rushing attack that does not have Saquon Barkley now, for the tight end position that does not have Darren Waller now, and for the young receivers who are being developed. And also Darius Slayton, who is the wily veteran at this point. Makes me feel old because I remember covering a 5th round pick, Darius Slayton, be like, who is this guy out of Auburn? Holy crap, he's doing so well. And now he is the old vet on the wide receiver squad.
Yeah, he's the vet in the room.
How old is he? Like 28, maybe? No, 27. Darius Slayton. I'm going to say 27. Let's see. 27. Yeah.
Yeah. Still young. In his receiver prime.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He's probably looking for a contract.
Definitely looking for a contract, and we'll see if he can get the playing time he needs. But Nick, anything else on this episode that stood out to you? I want to hold off on the stuff from next week's episode, talk about it then, some trade up options. I think we'll get more info. But anything we missed from this episode?
From this episode, no, I think we hit on everything other than when the song came on at the beginning of the episode. I did not know if that was Randy Newman or Kermit the Frog. I think it was a Muppet theme. I think it was
Might have been.
Yes,
it was definitely interesting.
I thought it was Randy Newman at first, and I was like, no. And I think it was something to do with Kermit the Frog.
Is Randy Newman the guy who sang, do you remember that song, Short People?
Short People? No, I do not remember that.
People got no reason.
Yep.
That song?
Yeah, that's definitely Randy Newman. Yes.
Oh, my God. Quick story. My brother, shout out Matt Schneider, listens to this podcast, and my dad, who listens religiously. Matt doesn't listen as much. He's a bad brother, and I say that all the time, but I'm joking. I'm joking.
Are you joking?
But nah, that's actually a Tim Robinson reference from. I think you still leave. I'm joking, but you wouldn't get that one, Nick. But Dylan, shout out Dylan's Burger. But my dad used to play that song in the car all the time, and for some reason, my brother was personally offended by it, and he thought it was about him, like Short People. And I was just always gonna remember that song. My brother would freak out when he put it on in the car, and me and my dad would just get a good laugh, messing with Maddie and giving him a lot of shit about short people. Because at the time, I guess he felt like he was short, but he was just a kid. He was like, yeah.
To make him feel better, you should play "You Got a Friend in Me."
Yeah, another all-star hit. All right, I think that's all we have for today. Giants Hard Knocks episode 4 recap. Keep it locked and loaded. Training camp is on the way, so that's where the coverage is headed for us. But obviously, we'll recap the rest of Hard Knocks as well, and maybe add in some other stuff too. Have a great rest of your night or day, and we'll talk to you soon.